Marcus Chen pressed his weathered hands against the cold beer bottle, watching the Montana sky turn deep purple as evening settled over his ranch. At 67, he had grown comfortable with silence, finding peace in the sound of wind through grass and the distant lowing of cattle. 8 years had passed since Sarah's funeral. 8 years since he last heard another human voice in his kitchen, and Marcus had convinced himself he preferred it that way. The nearest neighbor lived 15 miles down a dusty road that barely deserved the name, and that was exactly how Marcus liked his world arranged. He took another sip of beer and leaned back in his porch chair. The same chair where he had sat with Sarah on countless evenings, planning their retirement together. Before cancer stole those dreams away. The stars were just beginning to appear when the sky exploded with light. 7 streaks of fire tore across the heavens, burning brighter than falling stars, their orange trails painting the darkness with an urgency that made Marcus's heart race. These weren't meteors or satellites breaking apart in the atmosphere. These objects were moving with purpose, controlled trajectories that spoke of intelligence and desperation. Marcus stood slowly, his engineer's mind immediately calculating angles and speeds, while his rancher's instincts worried about his cattle in the south pasture where the objects seemed headed. The first impact shook the ground beneath his boots, followed by 6 more thunderous crashes that sent his cattle bellowing and scattering in panic across the grassland. Smoke rose from the impact sites, black columns against the starlit sky that Marcus could see even from his porch 3 miles away. Common sense told him to call the sheriff, maybe even the military, because whatever had just crashed on his property was definitely not from around here. Instead, he found himself walking to his old pickup truck, grabbing a flashlight and his grandfather's hunting rifle. Not because he felt threatened, but because Sarah had always said he was too curious for his own good. And death hadn't changed. That particular character flaw. The drive across his property felt longer than usual. His headlights cutting through darkness that seemed thicker somehow, charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. As he crested the hill overlooking the south pasture, Marcus saw the crash sites clearly for the first time. 7 smoking craters arranged in a rough circle, each containing what looked like a metallic egg split open to reveal glowing interior chambers. Steam rose from the alien metal, and Marcus could hear a low humming sound that seemed to vibrate in his bones. He parked 50 yards away and walked forward slowly, rifle lowered but ready, his flashlight beam dancing nervously across ground that had been torn apart by the impacts. Movement near the largest crater caught his attention, and Marcus nearly dropped his flashlight when he saw them. 7 figures huddled together beside the wreckage, clearly not human but undeniably alive. Their bodies tall and graceful, despite being wrapped in what appeared to be torn ceremonial robes. Their skin seemed to glow with its own light, shifting between pale blue and silver like moonlight on water. And when one of them looked up at his approach, Marcus found himself staring into eyes that were larger than human eyes, darker than the Montana sky, and filled with a grief so profound it made his chest ache. The tallest of the group rose slowly, moving with dignity despite her obvious exhaustion, her luminescent skin flickering as if struggling to maintain its glow. When she spoke, her voice carried a musical quality that made the mechanical translation device clipped to her robes seem almost insulting in its flat delivery. "Human," she said, and Marcus noticed how she pronounced the word with neither fear nor condescension. Simply recognition. "I am Zara of the Veltar people. Now we have traveled far, seeking sanctuary, for our world is destroyed and our mates are dead, killed, defending the ships that carried us to safety. We have nowhere else to go, no other hope except the kindness of strangers." Marcus looked at these 7 alien women. These refugees from a cosmic tragedy he couldn't even imagine, and saw something in their faces that he recognized completely. The hollow emptiness behind their eyes, the way they held themselves as if expecting another blow to fall. The quiet desperation of people who had lost everything that mattered and were now dependent on the mercy of others. He had seen that same expression in his mirror every morning for 8 years, had worn that same lost look until he finally stopped looking in mirrors altogether. These beings were widows, just as he was a widower, survivors of a catastrophe that had left them stranded and alone in a universe that suddenly seemed too big and too empty. Marcus lowered his rifle completely, clicked off his flashlight, and made a decision that would change his life forever. "Well," he said, quietly, his voice rough from years of talking mainly to cattle, "I suppose I've got room." 3 days after the crash, Marcus discovered that his simple offer of shelter had unleashed a cascade of complications he never could have imagined. Starting with the fact that Earth's gravity was slowly crushing his alien guests and ending with the terrifying realization that the federal government was already asking questions about unusual electromagnetic readings detected over Montana. The 7 Veltar women moved through his house like ghosts, their luminescent skin growing dimmer each day as they struggled against the heavier gravitational pull that made every step an exhausting effort. Zara, their unofficial leader, spent most of her time apologizing for being a burden while trying to hide the obvious pain that walking caused her elongated frame. The youngest, Kira, had barely spoken since their arrival, sitting motionless by the living room window and staring at the sky as if expecting more ships to appear, though Marcus suspected she was really hoping to see her dead mate somehow descend from the stars to take her home. The food situation proved equally challenging when Marcus discovered that human cuisine was not just unpalatable to the Veltar, but potentially toxic. Their digestive systems requiring mineral-rich plants that simply didn't exist on Earth. Marcus found himself diving headfirst into alien biology textbooks salvaged from their escape pods, learning about their dual-sun homeworld and the specific light frequencies their bodies needed to properly process nutrients. His engineering background became invaluable as he worked 18-hour days retrofitting his guest rooms with gravity field generators cannibalized from their crashed vessels, rigging up a makeshift hydroponic system in his barn using LED arrays tuned to match their homeworld spectrum, and even modifying his electrical system to provide the specific wavelengths of light that kept their skin healthy and glowing. The breakthrough in their relationship came during the 2nd week, when Lysa, one of the middle-aged widows with intricate silver markings across her temples, found Marcus sitting on his porch at dawn with his usual cup of coffee and discovered an empty chair waiting beside him. She said nothing, simply settled into the chair with visible relief at being off her feet, and they watched the sunrise together in comfortable silence that spoke louder than any conversation could have. When Nira, whose engineering knowledge rivaled his own, discovered his workshop and observed him patiently rebuilding a tractor engine with methodical precision, she offered suggestions about metallurgy and stress distribution that improved the repair beyond anything Marcus had thought possible. Each day brought small moments of connection as the barriers between human and alien began to dissolve through shared work, shared meals of specially grown Veltar plants, and the universal language of grief that needed no translation. The fragile peace Marcus had built was shattered when 3 black vehicles appeared on his access road one morning, kicking up clouds of dust as they approached with the aggressive confidence of federal authority. Agent Harrison stepped out of the lead car wearing a suit that cost more than Marcus made in 6 months, and an expression that suggested he dealt with alien refugees every Tuesday before lunch. His words were polite but carried the unmistakable threat of government power as he explained that the Veltar women needed to be relocated to a proper facility for processing, integration, and evaluation, as if they were dangerous machinery, rather than traumatized refugees seeking shelter. Marcus felt something cold and angry settle in his stomach as he realized that his quiet life was about to be torn apart by bureaucrats who saw his alien guests as problems to be solved rather than people to be helped. When Agent Harrison suggested that untrained civilians couldn't possibly handle the complexities of first contact protocols, Marcus found himself standing straighter, his voice carrying a strength he hadn't felt since Sarah's death as he delivered a response that would echo through first contact history. "These ladies are guests on my property," he said, his words cutting through the morning air like bullets. "They came seeking help, and I gave it. And if you want to take them anywhere, you'll have to go through me first." What happened next surprised everyone, including Marcus himself, as all 7 Veltar women stepped out of the house and arranged themselves beside him on the porch, their grief-dimmed skin suddenly blazing with fierce light as they found something worth protecting for the first time since their world died. Agent Harrison looked at this impossible alliance of 1 stubborn rancher and 7 alien widows, realized he was facing something far more complicated than his briefing had prepared him for, and reached for his radio to call for backup, setting the stage for a confrontation that would determine whether this unlikely family would survive its first real test. Agent Harrison returned exactly 1 week later. But this time, the dust cloud on Marcus's access road stretched for miles as an entire military convoy surrounded the ranch like a steel noose, tightening around everything Marcus had built with his alien family. Armored vehicles took positions along the property line while helicopters circled overhead, their rotors beating the air with mechanical thunder that sent the cattle fleeing to the far corners of the pasture and made the windows of the old ranch house rattle in their frames. Marcus stood at his kitchen window, watching soldiers establish a perimeter, their weapons gleaming in the morning sun, while behind him the 7 Veltar women prepared for what they assumed would be another devastating loss, another forced displacement from the only place they had found peace since their world burned. Agent Harrison's voice boomed across the ranch through a military megaphone, his words cutting through the helicopter noise with bureaucratic precision as he announced that the alien refugees would be relocated immediately to a secure government facility for the greater good of human-alien relations, because untrained civilians simply could not be trusted to handle the complexities of first contact protocols. Zara's luminescent skin had dimmed to barely a whisper of light as she quietly explained to Marcus that on her homeworld, when authorities came for refugees, resistance only made things worse for everyone involved, and maybe it would be better for them to go peacefully rather than cause him more trouble. The youngest, Kira, spoke her first complete sentence since arriving when she whispered that perhaps they had brought Marcus enough danger already, her voice so small and broken that Marcus felt something fierce and protective rage to life in his chest. He turned away from the window to study these 7 beings who had somehow transformed his empty house into a home filled with laughter, purpose, and the kind of warm chaos that comes when people genuinely care for each other's well-being. In just 2 weeks, they had revolutionized his ranch in ways that seemed impossible, with Lisa's advanced agricultural knowledge producing crops that grew faster and healthier than anything he had seen in 40 years of farming, while Nira's engineering expertise had improved his equipment efficiency by margins that would make corporate researchers weep with envy. Each woman had found her own way to contribute, turning his struggling property into something more prosperous and vibrant than it had been since Sarah's death. And Marcus realized that losing them would be like losing his family all over again, except this time he had a choice in the matter. The sound of Agent Harrison's boots on his porch steps echoed through the house like a countdown to disaster. But instead of opening the door, Marcus walked to his old safe and pulled out a manila folder that contained documents he had been secretly preparing with his lawyer for the past week. Legal adoption papers, 7 sets of them, each one carefully crafted to establish these alien women as his legal daughters under Montana state law, a loophole that would make their forced relocation significantly more complicated from a legal standpoint. In human culture, Marcus said quietly, his voice steady despite the military presence surrounding his home. Family isn't just about blood or species or what planet you come from. It's about choice, and I'm choosing you 7 as my daughters, if you'll have an old rancher as your father. The Veltar women stared at the adoption papers with expressions of shock and wonder, their skin beginning to glow brighter as they realized what Marcus was offering them. Not just legal protection, but genuine acceptance into the most sacred of human institutions. Zara's hands trembled as she touched the documents. Understanding that this stubborn human was willing to fight the entire government rather than let them be taken away. While Kira looked up at Marcus with the first spark of hope he had seen in her dark eyes since the night she crashed into his life. Agent Harrison's pounding on the front door grew more insistent. His shouted demands for surrender mixing with the helicopter noise and the distant sound of soldiers taking final positions. But inside the kitchen, 7 alien widows and 1 determined rancher were about to make a stand that would redefine what family meant in an age when the stars were no longer empty and home could be found in the most unexpected places. The siege stretched through the night and into the following day. 19 hours of tense standoff that would forever change how humanity approached first contact with alien species. Beginning when Marcus stepped onto his porch alone at dawn, with his hands raised but his eyes blazing with defiance that made even the hardened soldiers shift uncomfortably in their positions. Agent Harrison had expected a quick surrender from an isolated rancher facing overwhelming government force, but instead found himself dealing with a man who had spent 8 years grieving and had finally found something worth fighting for. Someone who understood that some things were more valuable than personal safety or government approval. Agent Harrison, Marcus called across the yard, his voice carrying clearly in the crisp morning air, before you tear apart something that works. Something that makes all of us stronger. Why don't you actually see what we've accomplished here, instead of assuming the worst about people who are different from you? What followed was the most unusual diplomatic negotiation in human history. Conducted on a ranch porch surrounded by military hardware while 7 alien women watched through windows. Their luminescent skin flickering with nervous energy as their fate hung in the balance. Marcus invited the federal agents into his home, not as surrender, but as education, showing them hydroponic systems that produced food more efficiently than any agricultural facility on Earth, demonstrating technology integration that had happened safely and voluntarily without a single security breach or cultural contamination incident. Agent Harrison found himself touring a ranch that had become more prosperous in 2 weeks than it had been in 8 years. Witnessing alien engineering techniques that could revolutionize human industry while observing cultural exchange that enriched both species rather than threatening either one. The breakthrough moment came when Zara stepped forward, her skin shifting to deeper blues as she addressed Agent Harrison directly, her musical voice carrying the weight of experience that government protocols had never considered. On our world, she said, we had rules too. Procedures about how different species should interact, where they could live, how they should be processed and integrated into society. But those rules failed completely when the destroyers came too. Our system, they failed because they were built on fear and suspicion instead of understanding and compassion. Her words hung in the air like a challenge, forcing Agent Harrison to confront the possibility that his carefully planned relocation might be exactly the wrong approach to a situation that required flexibility rather than rigid adherence to untested protocols. The moment that changed everything came when Kira, the youngest and most traumatized of the refugees, quietly offered to demonstrate her species' healing abilities on Sergeant Rodriguez, a soldier who had been struggling with chronic pain from a training injury that had occurred months earlier and had resisted all human medical treatment. Agent Harrison watched in stunned silence as Kira placed her glowing hands on the sergeant's damaged shoulder, her skin pulsing with soft light that seemed to flow into the injured man like liquid starlight. And within minutes, Rodriguez was completely healed, not just pain-free, but stronger and more resilient than he had been before the original injury occurred. The implications were staggering, suggesting that cooperation with the Veltar could bring medical advances that would save countless human lives, technologies that would be freely shared rather than forcibly extracted through government intimidation and separation. Marcus seized the moment with the tactical precision of an engineer who had spent decades solving impossible problems, his voice cutting through Agent Harrison's shock with simple truth that could not be denied or dismissed. "You can tear apart something that works," he said. "Something that's making all of us stronger and safer and more capable than we were alone. Or you can learn from it and help it grow. But understand this clearly. These women are my daughters now, and they're not going anywhere without a fight. And after 8 years of having nothing to lose, I've got plenty of fight left in me." Agent Harrison found himself facing an impossible choice between following orders that would destroy a successful integration and reporting back to Washington that maybe, just maybe, the government's entire approach to alien contact was fundamentally flawed from the beginning. The standoff ended when he made a call that bypassed his immediate superiors and went directly to the president. It's a conversation that lasted 3 hours and concluded with the ranch being designated as the first official human-alien integration zone in history, with Marcus Chen appointed as its civilian coordinator and his 7 Veltar daughters recognized as legal residents with full protection under both human and newly drafted interspecies law. 6 months after the siege that changed interspecies relations forever, Marcus Chen found himself standing on his expanded porch watching something that would have seemed impossible during his lonely years of grief. As the 7th refugee ship of the week descended toward the newly constructed landing pad where Kira waited with a translation device and a warm smile that had replaced the hollow desperation he first saw in her eyes, word had spread through underground networks across 3 star systems that there was a place on Earth where aliens weren't just tolerated or processed through government facilities, but genuinely welcomed as family members by a stubborn rancher who had proven that compassion could accomplish what fear and regulation never could. The ranch had transformed beyond recognition, with new buildings constructed using hybrid human Veltar architecture that seemed to grow from the landscape itself, their walls shifting between solid matter and translucent energy depending on the needs of their inhabitants, while underground chambers provided perfect gravity environments for species whose physiology couldn't adapt to Earth's heavier pull. Marcus had become something he never expected in his retirement, serving as an unofficial ambassador and mentor for integration sites being established across 6 continents. His expertise in bridging cultural gaps now sought by governments who had initially wanted to arrest him for harboring alien refugees. Zara had evolved from traumatized widow to Earth's first official alien ambassador, working directly with human leaders to establish protocols based on understanding rather than suspicion, her natural diplomatic skills enhanced by her deep knowledge of galactic politics and refugee psychology gained through her own journey from despair to hope. Each of his 7 daughters had found not just a home, but a calling that used their unique abilities to benefit both humans and the growing community of displaced beings who arrived weekly seeking the legendary sanctuary where differences were celebrated rather than feared. Lisa's agricultural innovations were now feeding refugee camps on 4 continents. Her techniques for growing alien crops and Earth soil solving food shortages that had plagued interspecies integration efforts since first contact began, while Nira's engineering contributions had advanced human technology by decades, her hybrid designs revolutionizing everything from spacecraft construction to medical equipment in ways that benefited species across the galaxy. The most profound transformation, however, had occurred in Marcus himself. The hollow-eyed widower who had lived as a hermit for 8 years was now surrounded by constant activity, his kitchen table hosting diplomatic meetings between species who had never met before, his barns serving as a workshop where beings from different worlds collaborated on projects that seemed like magic to older humans, but were simply the natural result of combining diverse perspectives and technologies. On clear Montana evenings, Marcus would sit on his porch with whichever daughters happened to be home from their various missions and responsibilities, watching new refugees learn to interact with earth horses or tend to hybrid gardens that bloomed with colors that had no names in human languages. And he would marvel at how his simple decision to offer shelter had rippled outward to touch lives across the galaxy. The question Zara asked him one evening about whether he ever regretted giving up his peaceful solitude made him laugh as he watched Kira demonstrate to a group of newly arrived refugees how Earth creatures could be gentle and trustworthy despite their alien appearance. "Peace isn't the absence of chaos," he replied, his words carrying the wisdom of someone who had learned the difference between being alone and being lonely. "It's finding love in the middle of all the beautiful madness that comes when different people choose to care for each other." In the distance, navigation lights blinked against the star-filled sky as another ship approached, carrying more refugees who had heard about the impossible place where a retired human engineer and 7 alien widows had proven that family transcends biology, species, and the vast distances between worlds, where the greatest adventures begin not with journeys to distant stars, but with the simple courage to open your door to someone who needs help, and where the future of galactic civilization was being written one adoption paper at a time by beings who understood that love, not law, was the foundation upon which lasting peace could be built.